I am a developer. I work at Shodo actually, which is a company in Paris. I introduce myself as a technology agnostic developer because I really interested to any kind of subjects which are not really linked to a special technology. For example, I like agile, architecture, DDD, clean code, and these kind of things. So domain-driven design is an approach that puts the needs of the business in the center of the software. And it's also a mindset. Like BDD, TDD, it's a mindset to first of all think on needs of your domain experts, and then put the technical blocks or link these needs to the external resources like databases or user interface. So first of all, we will focus on use cases, not on our data structure or how our user interface should look like. It's more made for complex domains. So if you have a CRUD system, DDD will not really fit to this kind of project. And you should see DDD as a huge toolbox. So depends on your needs. You can choose one of these tools in your toolbox and use them to solve some problems. You should know also that DDD becomes a really active and modern community. We have DDD Europe events that happen all Februaries each year. This year I presented two hands-on at DDD Europe, and we have also many other communities around the DDD all around the world. So DDD is broken to three main parts, three principal parts: the collaborative modeling, strategic design, and tactical design. In collaborative modeling, we are looking to break the wall that we can find in many software teams, the evolve between domain experts and technical people. In most of the time, they can't communicate each other because they don't really speak the same language. So we try to create a ubiquitous language based on business terms to facilitate the communication between domain expert and technical team. In strategic design, we look more about bounded context. What is a bounded context? Imagine that you have this big rock at the left of this slide. You want to move this rock from one point to the other point. It's a complex problem. And the solution is just to break it down to two smaller parts. These smaller parts, we call them bounded context. And now we can give some priorities to these smaller parts. And so again, that helps us to achieve the business experts solution easier. In the tactical design, we are more interested about technical parts, the design patterns that fits DDD and helps us to maintain our code, helps us to make it more testable. And they are building blocks that we can use. But you should know that the tactical design of DDD is less important than the collaborative modeling and strategic design. So in short, the aim of DDD is to decrease the complexity of the domain. You have many tools to use to achieve that, and improve the communication within a team. In DDD, we want just one team made by all people, technical business experts, commercial product owners, and so on. So that's all for my first presentation, which was an introduction to domain-driven design. Let's move to the main presentation, which is DDD kills your project. So let's start with the story. I love stories because these are the stories that we live that make the experiences. So I met one of my clients that called me to tell that, yeah, we had a very beautiful image about DDD. So we spent a lot of time and money. We formed our teams. We implemented DDD, but our problems they didn't solve, and even we have more problems with DDD. So before continuing this story, let me have a conversation with you about who is an architect and what is an architecture. So I will just ask you to turn on your microphones and tell me, for you, who is an architect?
Basically, a person who, like, I don't know, designs the system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So a person who designed the system. Okay. Something else? Any other idea?
A person who decides how the system is done.
Yeah. So again, we have one person who do something. Okay. In my definition, the architect is not a person, it's a role. Okay. So this role could be shared between all the persons, all the developers who are your teammates. The architect should not be the person who is in 23rd floor of a building who decide for all your technical decisions. You should put him in all your on the copy of all your mails. You never met him, you never know him, but he decide for you. He never code with you, but he decide for you. He doesn't know the problems of your team, how your code is hard to do, but he decide for you. This person is not an architect. He's something else. But an architect is really a role. For example, a Scrum Master is a role. Product owner is a role. Developer or even a business expert is a role. I found many developers who are business experts because they read the code and they know the domain better than functional people. Okay, so these roles we should share inside of your inside of our team, and we should just decide for ourselves, not anyone else. So what is an architecture now? Again, turn on your microphone and tell me what is your opinion about an architecture?
Organization of some kind of software solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how the software is organized is the architecture. It's not a bad definition. Okay. Something else?
The blueprints how software must be done.
Okay, a blueprint of how the software must be done. Good definition too. So, you know, all these definitions that you did is taking the decisions. Decide how the software should be worked. Decide how the software should be designed. So these are the decisions that make our that made our architecture an architecture. And taking and each decision have a cost. Okay, so each decision made a change, and this change has an amount. Okay, so to having a good architecture that doesn't cost a lot, you should defer the decisions. More you defer your decisions, more you have a better architecture. For example, if you try to decide which kind of database you should use before coding the project, it's not deferring the decisions, it's taking the decisions. So try to defer the decisions to a time later, and just focus yourself in what is really important for your business and for your domain. That will help you to have an architecture who costs less. And the only way to measure the quality of an architect, an architect and an architecture, is to measure the cost of change. So if you have a system, you have a change. If implementing this change costs not a lot, so you have a good architecture, so you are a good architect. If you made a microservice system, but that works really well, but when the change arrived, it cost a lot, you were not a good architect. You didn't take in consideration the needs of your clients. Okay, so by definition, a good architecture should be testable. I mean, we should run tests really fast. They should be isolated. The system should be scalable. I mean, if we have some change to our system, we can integrate these new features easily. The software should be flexible. You know, the term soft at the beginning of software, why it's not hard, it's soft. Why? Because you want to add something to your software, you do it, you build it, and you have a new software. You want to add a room to your home as a software, you add a room, you build it, and you have a new home with an additional room. A real home is that's not the case. If you want to add a room to a real home, it costs a lot, it takes a lot of time. So that's why we say software, because we should add and remove something to it easily, rapidly, and make a new software. And it should be maintainable. So if you have a bug, you should be able to identify where the bugs come from and rapidly solve it. Okay, now let's back to our story. We were with a client that's implemented the DDD, and he was not satisfied. Now we have a definition about architect and architecture, and so we can discuss about the problems that are the bad practices of DDD. The first of all, shy developers. If you have the developers who don't ask questions, who are isolated, who love techniques and nothing at all, who love to implementing complex solutions, these are the developers that don't fit to a DDD project, because you should take the time with your domain expert. You should you had to go lunch with him. You have to ask questions. It's really important to ask questions because you want to learn the domain. And if you if you are not this kind of developer, you don't fit this kind of projects. Okay, so don't be shy if you want to progress in DDD. The second bad practice, translate the ubiquitous language. So I search on Google about the word clients. I don't know how we pronounce it in Latvian, but for clients in Latvian, I had, sorry, I had 3 suggestions from Google Translate. So the client, the customer, and the patron. Okay. Imagine that the client is a word used by your domain expert. If each of your developers translates this word to a different translation, so client, customer, and patron, you will find yourself with three different objects in your code. You will find yourself with 3 people who speaks with different terms. And that's because you just try to translate everything in English. I'm sure that there are other words in Latvian that we can't even translate. So that's another reason why we should not translate our code, our business terms to any other language. That's not because we write our code in English that we must translate everything. If you really need to translate your terms, you need to have a glossary. Okay, this glossary is something like what you want. So you have the business term, and then in another column you have the definition. So the client is someone who has ordered at least one item in the past or who has a pending order. Okay. So absence of glossary is another bad practice if we want to do DDD. I hope most of you knows the clean code book made by Robert C. Martin, known as Uncle Bob in the virtual in the virtual life. And in this book, we have a chapter about meaningful names. In this book, we say that if you have some unpronounceable words, you should translate them. That's not really true, because imagine if you have the SPBB term, that means strategic performance-based budgeting in Thailand. You will not translate it. You will not use in your conversations strategic performance-based budgeting in each sentences that you say, or in your code. It will be a really big name for an object. So the idea is, when we do DDD, just take the business term, so SPBB, and use it as it is, because in our conversations we use SPBB, and that means something special to our business experts. I will do the 5th bad practice, and then you have, I will give you 5 minutes to ask your questions. Okay. Another bad practice. So you have glossaries, but you have just one glossary for all of your bounded context. And imagine if you have the term SPBB in different bounded contexts. For example, Google tells me that SPBB in Thailand is strategic performance-based budgeting. In Wisconsin state is sun, prairie, band boosters. In Canada and in India, we have other terms for SPBB. So if you use SPBB, if you have just one glossary, you can't solve this problem. You should have one glossary by bounded context. Okay. Another example. Imagine that we are in a human resource domain. Okay, so in a human resource domain, we need to, we have a bounded context, which is sourcing. So in sourcing, we want to, as a human resource, go to social networks and find CVs with some skills. So what I'm interested in this bounded context is the skills of some person, a candidate, and the source of the contact. So it was, I found this person on LinkedIn or on Indeed, Monster, or any other site. Then the domain will grow. So you have the interview concept in your domain. So in interview, you have also a candidate, but you look for his skills, his name, his experiences, and his soft skills, because you want to evaluate him by someone else. So you should find a recruiter who can evaluate the candidate. So you are not interested in the same characteristics of candidates, and the domain will grow yet, and you have the contracting bounded context where the candidate passed the interview, he is accepted, and now you want to make a contract for him. So you need his name, his address, his social number, and his salary. Imagine if you have just one object candidate shared between all these contexts. The object candidate will grow. And so it's more difficult to maintain. If there is any bug, all contracting, sourcing, and interview will break down. And so this is a bad practice. The idea is just to separate the candidate in its own bounded context. It's not a problem if we share code. It's not a problem if we have, for example, skills in the sourcing and interview bounded context. It's okay to duplicate code between bounded contexts. And if we do that, we can go in our glossary and define some definitions. For example, the candidate in sourcing is someone found on a recruitment network with a CV that matches search criteria. And in interview is someone who should be evaluated by a technical recruiter. And in contracting is someone who passed his interview successfully and will be integrated to enterprise. So by these definitions, could you please turn on your microphones and tell me if the terms candidate is a good term for all these bounded contexts? Could you
Probably
find,
not.
Sorry?
Probably not. I would say contracting, it's you get into becoming an employee.
Yeah, sure. Very good. Very good answer. And how about the two other contexts? The interview is okay. Sorry?
Yeah, interview is okay. A bit unsure what I would call somebody that you're looking for or searching.
Yeah, so a prospect, okay? You're prospecting, and now you can see that separating your domain to bounded context can help your domain experts to find better terms for your bounded context for your objects. You should consider any bounded context as a country. Okay, so when you go from one country to another country, the language change, the rules change. And even if you have, for example, Argentina and Spain that speaks the same language, you can find terms in Argentina that you can't find in Spain and vice versa. Okay, so really take a bounded context like a country. So I will give you 5 minutes if you have questions until this part of my presentation. Or if there is no question, I will continue.
I just wanted to remind that you can also type questions if you don't want to speak.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. So someone told me that it's Lithuanian, not Latvian. I'm so sorry about that. This is my fault. Yeah. Okay. So if you don't have any question, we can continue. The sixth bad practice is dry. So in this wonderful book, The Pragmatic Programmer, wrote by David Thomas and Andrew Hunt, for the first time, we use the term dry, don't repeat yourself. We use a lot this term when we meet software crafters, and it's really it simply means that you should not have, for example, duplicated code. If you find some duplicated code, you should, for example, make a new class or method for that to respect dry. Dry in domain-driven design or in distributed systems not really match. So you should use more risk word when you are in a distributed system, for example, a microservice, or in DDD. So don't repeat yourself in the same context. As we could see here, it was not a problem to share some parts of code in different bounded contexts, and that's what we are repeating just here. The seventh bad practice is focusing on data, as we told at the beginning of the presentation. If you have a data-centric architecture, you will encounter the problems. Why? Because you start your modeling based on data, based on a schema that you will that you will do, like a logical model. And then generally we use an ORM, so an object related mapping, to transform this logical database model to our code. And then we continue to using the same data schema to our user interface. So everything is coupled with our database schema. And it means that if, for example, you have a column which is an integer, and you want to change the type to varchar, to a string, you should make the same change in your domain and then in your user interface, even in your tests. And that's not the type of architectures that fits DDD. I had a client of myself who had a legacy system, and the system was really fragile. I mean by fragile, we couldn't even add one line of code because we could break something, we could have a bug in production code. So they ask us to make a new greenfield system, implementing the same behaviors of the legacy system. And as we were short in time, we decided to use the same database schema. We didn't create a new database schema. And even if we had a mindset of focusing ourselves on behaviors, we were impacted by the database schema, because we were reading the code and reading the code and reading the database schema formed the structure of the objects in our minds. And so the result was not really satisfying. And the idea to solve this kind of problems is using anti-corruption layers. an anti-corruption layer is just a layer at the beginning of your use cases that take the data and then filter these data and then translate the data to the objects of your domain. So by this practice, you can have a small objects that you can maintain easily, and these objects are well formed, basing your ubiquitous language, basing your glossary. Okay. DDD is not an architecture. I saw people who say, if you do DDD, you should use reactive architecture. If you do DDD, you should use hexagonal architecture, CQRS, event sourcing. These are the types of architecture that fits really well with DDD. But DDD is not an architecture. DDD is really a mindset. It's a toolbox, it's not just code. So you can say that DDD is a kind of architecture. The 10th bad practice, and then I will stop if you have any question. So again, I had another client. It was a bank, and they put DDD everywhere in all of their systems. They would implement DDD, and that couldn't work because DDD is not a silver bullet. It's not a solution for any kind of problem. Again, if you have a CRUD system, you don't need any complexity in your domain. You don't need DDD or any other this kind of types of architecture. So, do you have any question until this part of the presentation? Okay, so I will continue the presentation. If you don't have any question, it means that the presentation is understandable for all of you, or you didn't understand anything, so you don't have any question. I hope it's the first case. So another bad practices is having coupling between bounded context. Imagine you have an interview bounded context. When the interview is finished, you want to send an email to the human resource to tell us, okay, the interview is finished and the candidate is passed it successfully or not. So you will use a mail sender bounded context. Here we have a hard coupling between these two bounded contexts. Imagine if the mail sender bounded context breaks down, crashes. The interview bounded context will not work, and so you have a problem. Okay, so now it means that any bounded context that you use, they are coupled hardly together, and that could make some problem like that. The idea is using messages. So when the interview bounded context finish his work, send a message to a message broker. For example, it could be RabbitMQ, Kafka, or even any other framework. And then mail sender who is listening to this message will receive it and then do some other stuffs. Again, after the mail sender could send other message for other bounded contexts and so on. So by using messages-based systems, you can lose the coupling between the bounded context. Now, if the mail sender crashes, the bounded context interview can continue his work and nothing bad happen. let's change the domain. Let's go to another domain, for example, domain of IKEA you have, or any other e-commerce sites. So you have some orders that use a table in your database, and you have another bounded context, which is stock, that use the same the database schema. Imagine if the stock bounded context lock the table that is used by order. Your system will not work, even if they use messaging-based system. As they are coupled in data structure, it can make them couple again. So here the idea is again to separate the databases and use eventual consistency to synchronize the data between these two bounded contexts. But how we can decide if we need eventual consistency, or we need these kind of systems that any bounded context use the same data? The response of this question is not to be decided by technical teams, but by the business experts. For example, we had a client, we were on a hotel reservation system, and so we are afraid that if we have just one room available in a hotel, and we have 5 clients that wants to book the room at the same time, we were afraid of giving this we were afraid of booking this room for more than one client. So we made a very complex solution to avoid this kind of problems. And then when we showed the solution to our business expert, he told us it's not a problem, because all hotels know this problem, and then they have always 2 or 3 rooms free if something like that happened. So if before implementing the complex solution, we were talking with our business domain, we could save a lot of time, a lot of energy, and we could have a better solution. Okay. So eventual consistency or not, synchronizing, having data always synchronized, or having data that will be synchronized sometime, this is not a decision that should be made by technical teams, but by business experts. Another kind of hard coupling between bounded contexts, you can see here in this DDD project, we have different bounded contexts. They are they are well structured, and they seems to be independent. But the problem comes when the objects of each bounded context calls each other. So in this kind of system, you have just a distributed monolith. You have just a monolith that you organized otherwise. And so you still having coupling between your bounded context. The solution is just expose services. Each bounded context should expose its own services. And if another bounded context needs to some data or some services exposed by the other bounded context, they will just call it. You can use, for example, REST architecture to easily having these kind of solutions for your bounded context. So really, again, the bounded context is something that is isolated, that is autonomous, and can work alone. The 12th bad practice, finding a wrong core domain. So in a domain knowledge in DDD, we will break down the domain to 3 kind of subdomains. We have the core subdomain where we have the part of our system that's it's the base need of our business experts. It means that if this part of system break down or crash, the business will lost a lot of money. It's the secret sauce of our software. That's what makes different our system from the others. Okay, so it's the main part of our system. We have also generic subdomains. These are the parts of our system that we can buy, or we can refer to another team to make. For example, if you want to use emails and some calendar, you can use Google Suites. Okay, so you will pay for these services and you will use them. These are the generic subdomains. And at the end, the supportive subdomain is a part of our system which is neither core nor generic. It's a part of system that we will do by ourselves, but it's not as important as core part. And if it's crashed, it's not a big problem for our system. So finding the right core domain is really important, because this is the part that you will put your best developers. This is the part that you should be sure that is covered by tests, that you will have a bigger budget from your client for this part of code. And if you identify it wrongly, it could make a lot of problems for your team. I had a client who were an online course system, and was implementing a very good system for selling the courses to the students. After analyzing the domain, we found that if the students come to this school to buy online courses, it's not because they have a good system to sell courses. That's because the students comes for the teachers. So this company stopped all developing system on selling courses. They just used a WordPress plugin to sell the courses, and then saved a lot of money to use for the other parts of system, for example, for marketing, or to finding better teachers. So finding the core domain is really important. It really helps your domain to grow rapidly. Focusing on tactical design. As we are developers, we love coding, and so we are more interested to tactical design, because there are design patterns, there are code, and this part of collaborating modeling and strategic design, we don't pay many attention to these parts. The point is that the tactical design is not really important. The most important parts of implementing DDD is understanding the domain, how it should work, and giving good priorities to the good parts, to decreasing the complexity. The tactical design will just help us to having a system which is more maintainable. In the live coding session, we will more talk about tactical design and different building blocks of this part. Large aggregates. So imagine you are again in the human resource domain. So you should plan an interview, and so you have an aggregate. And an aggregate in DDD is a graph of objects that are tightly together, and they mean something special together. If we separate them, they will lost their meaning. So we keep them together in an aggregate. An aggregate is just a package that you put some objects which are tightly coupled together. So, for example, to plan an interview, you need a candidate, you need a recruiter, and you need a time slot. Okay, so it's easy. But the domain grows, and then we told you, okay, you know, we need also to reserve some places because an interview should have a place. And then we tell you, okay, you know, we should also reserve some equipments. For example, a computer from computer system, because to evaluating the candidates, the recruiter should see him coding. And now you can see that your aggregate is growing and growing, and that's what we name a large aggregate. The idea is just to not letting the aggregate to be grown, but to separate these parts and keep the aggregate small. Okay. The aggregate part is a part that we can talk a lot about this part, but the time is short. I can't talk more about the aggregates, about invariants and these kind of things. So just keep in mind that you should keep your aggregates small. Coupling between aggregates. So if you have two separated aggregates, but the objects inside of the aggregates talk to each other, you have a hard coupling between them, and it's not a good idea. So the AR is aggregates root. Aggregates root is the object, the main object of your aggregates. For example, here is the interview, and the DO is a domain object inside of your aggregate. So the idea is to passing by the aggregate roots. So each time that we want to talking with another domain object, we should pass by the aggregate root. But even by this solution, we could have a coupling between the aggregates. So it's not a good solution again. The good solution is to having an application service. An application service, again, in the live coding session, I will talk about aggregates, about domain objects, about. So the application service is a layer before the layer, where we can find our use cases, and it has a responsibility of orchestrating the use case. So the idea here is to let application service calls the aggregates and then retrieve results. So by this solution, by passing by an application service, the aggregates becomes isolated, and there are much less coupling between different aggregates inside the bounded context. Imagine if you have some quiz aggregates, and a quiz have a list of questions. So the question is another aggregate. Again, you have a hard coupling here. And the idea is to using the identifier of the questions to losing again the coupling between quiz and questions. And in this solution, if we need some aggregate some question from its ID, we can call the database and found the question that we are looking for. So that's the last part of the presentation. So there are some prerequisites to implement DDD that we should take in consideration. So applying DDD takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, because we need to having an alignment between all of our models. We should use the same ubiquitous language in our codes, in our conversations, in our documents, and that takes time, this alignment. So to implement DDD, you should have a sustainable product. You will not implement DDD on a product that is temporary, that will be deleted in 1 month. You should have a sustainable product that lives long. You should have well-formed developers. They should know what is DDD. They should know what is the mindset of DDD. And they, as we said, they should not be shy. They should ask questions. They should go to talk with the domain experts. They should comprehend the domain and its problems to having a solution that fits these problems. You should also have available domain experts. So if you don't have available domain experts, you can't ask the questions, and so you can't have a good solution for the domain problems. And at the end, you need a complex domain. Again, if you have, for example, a CRUD system, DDD will not fit at all. So it's time for the questions. If you have any question about this part of presentation before going to live coding session.
Very nice demo, thank you. And I have a question about the bounded context.
Yes.
So let's say we have 3 bounded contexts, and let's call it a person entity, which actually the bounded context owns. And those bounded contexts treats the person entity the same. So how to deal with such a, let's say, problem like?
So the question was, you have 3 bounded contexts, okay? And I didn't, didn't understand the rest of your question. Sorry.
So you have a 3 bounded context, and every bounded context have the entity like person, let's call it.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a shared kernel.
Yeah, and every one of those bounded contexts treat the person the same. So all the properties, all the actions, everything's the same.
Okay, I see. So here in the strategic design of DDD, we have the context mapping chapter. Okay, and in this chapter we will present all the interaction between bounded contexts. So one of these interactions is shared kernel. So you have some part of the code which is shared between many bounded contexts, and it's not the ideal. Okay, the idea is to let each bounded context having its own code, because perhaps this shared kernel could grow differently in time between the bounded context. But if you really need to let these parts shared between these bounded contexts, the idea is just one team will work on it. Okay, this part of code should be well tested, because if it crashes, it will impact 3 bounded contexts. Okay, so first of all, the first thing that I suggest is to duplicating these parts in the 3 bounded context. If you can't, just one team work on it and maintain it.
Can you explain more what you mean by sharing a code? Do you mean by just, let's say, creating a nugget package and installing it, or I don't know, copy pasting, or have a shared project and other projects would add that project as a reference?
Yeah, for example, imagine that if you have an authentication system, and you have two separate bounded contexts that use the authentication system. This is a part of code that is shared between these two bounded contexts. So it could be it could be a big system, a complex system. It could be also a part of code. For example, it could be, I will show you the candidate again. And it could be just an object, for example, candidate, which is shared between different bounded contexts. The size is not really important. Did I respond to your question?
But could you elaborate more about the ways, or let's say, what would be better practice about the way, I mean, either to use a nugget package or copy a code or use a shared project as a reference? Let's say if we would talk about contracts, if we want to share contracts between different bounded contexts.
So you want to say, in this example of human resource, you want to share contracts?
Yeah, that could be an example.
Okay, so this contract could be shared by the services that the contracting bounded context could expose. Is if we can see, yeah. Imagine that you have this bounded context, and so you want to share some objects, some contract. So you can having a service that is exposed by the contracting bounded context. So if another bounded context wants to know about the state of some contract, they can just use this service and having the information that they are looking for.
Okay, thanks.
Each bounded context should be considered as a system. So you should be able to deploy it independently. It's really important for bounded context. Even a bounded context can have its own user interface. You have in some front technologies like React, if I'm not wrong, you have the micro front end architecture. So each part of your user interface is connected to a separate system and could be refreshed independently. That's really the idea of a bounded context. Be independent, work isolatedly, and live alone. Have you any other question? Okay, we had passed 1 hour. So what I suggest you is to having a short break and find each other in at
10 minutes, I guess, because we all have different time zones.
yeah, at 4:10.
Yeah. Okay, then see you all soon after break.
Okay. And I still available if you have any other questions during these 10 minutes. ask. So first of all, I would like to thank you, these two persons. So we have a problem in the journey of all the developers, that they should work with legacy code without any tests. The code is most of the time wrote in procedural, so we have many lines of code that will be executed one after the other with anemic domain objects. So the objects that we have, they have just some fields, the getters and setters, and any behavior. So they are anemic objects. They are data transfer objects. They are not the domain objects. And the problem is that our client comes and asks us to having new features. So we will add lines of code. And so the system becomes something unmaintainable, like the sandwich that you can see at the right of this slide. The idea is to making this big sandwich small and well done, with a domain-centric code with rich domain objects that have behaviors and and implementing tests for them, covering them with tests. Okay, let's do that. But before starting, I let this slide intentionally blank. I want to ask you, where do you start when you have this kind of problems? So turn on your microphone and give me some ideas.
With a business requirement, probably.
Ah, very well, very well. Thank you for your good answer. So the first thing to do is to learn the domain. So I can do that by different ways. I can, for example, read the code to understand the domain, or I can go to look for a domain expert if he is available. And so he told me the system is for a human resource who wants to find an available recruiter according to the candidate availabilities, who can test the candidate. And now, what will you do as a developer? Shouldn't you ask questions? Okay, and what questions could you ask about these sentences? Again, turn on your microphone and tell me which kind of questions can we ask here? Any suggestion? For example, we could ask about what do you mean by availability? What is an availability for a candidate? Is it just a date? Is it a slot of time? Could a candidate have a recruiter in the weekend? These are the kind of questions that we can ask. We can also ask another question about who can test. What does that mean? Who can test? So the business expert will respond, who can test is the recruiter that cover all the candidates' skills. Okay, so this is really the main idea of DDD. So going to business experts, asking questions, and understand well the domain. Okay, now that we have some important information about this use case, we can start to implement it. So first of all, let's have a look to the code. So you have two different repositories on GitHub. The first one is on Java, and the second one is in C#. If you are interested to developing the problem to other languages, I'm really open to it. So yeah, let's have a look to the code. So I will go through the Java I will just, I would like to hide this bar. I don't know how to do that. Hide video panel. That doesn't work. Hide floating meeting control. Okay, perfect. So I'm coding in Java. I'm using IntelliJ, and as you can see in my GitHub, I made a branch named explicitly for this session. So I will add the commits step by step. Let's go to the presentation mode. Oh, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Interpresentation. Okay. Again, I want to hide. Okay, perfect. I do Alt-1 to see my structure, the structure of my project. I will start by tests. So in my test, I have this class, which is plan interview. I name my tests by should, not by test, because it helps me to focus myself to the behavior of the test. So let's open it. Okay, we have nothing here. We have just a test that we can execute. So I will do that. I do Alt F5. Okay, the test passed because true is true. And for example, I can do false, rerun the test and show that my tests failed because false is not true. So I just proved that I have a system that is testable. Okay, perfect. So where can I find here in this job, in this tests package? I can have, I can see three classes. These are fake classes. So I mean by fake classes, the classes that are the dependencies, for example, a database. And I will just, as I don't want to be coupled to a database, so I will use these classes. Let's see what we can have here. For example, in fake candidates, the fake candidate implements the candidate repository, which have just one method, is find by ID. So I give him, I give it a candidate ID, and then he will find me a candidate. So this is the fake implementation of this repository. I have a collection of data, so a collection of data, a collection of candidates, and in the constructor, I add some data. For example, I have a candidate that his name is Alex. Alex do .NET, Java, PHP, and JS, and has an identity. The same for Bob, who do JS, is 456, and Kim, who do Ruby, and his ID is 789. Okay, let's go to another class. For example, fake recruiters. The fake recruiters again implements recruiter repository. In this repository, we can find the find recruiter by availability. So we pass this method a date, a local date, an availability, and then it will return us a list of recruiters who are available at this date. We have also book availability method. When we want to book a recruiter, we pass the recruiter and the date that he should be booked. Perfect. So we can see the implementation of these two methods. Again, we have a list of recruiters here, and our recruiters are, for example, Emma, who do PHP and JS. She's available at 20 February 2021. Mari with the ID 002, she do Java.NET PHP JS. She's available at 20 and 22. And we have also John who do Java.NET PHP and JS and who is available the 20. Okay, now that we saw what we have in tests part of our code of our project, we can go to see the use cases. So I have just one use case, which is plan interview. So the plan interview is my application service. So I talked to you about the application services. So here you can see that we have just one method, which is plan, to plan an interview. We have the repositories that we inject to this application service. And in this application service, we can see the scenario of our use case, the orchestration of our use case. So first of all, so imagine that you are a human resource. A client call you, a candidate call you and tell you that he is available next Friday. So you will pass his ID and his availability to the system, and at the end, you want to receive an interview as a human resource. So first of all, from candidate repository, I will find by ID the candidate. Then I will look for his skills, so the candidate skills. It's a list of string. And then I will look for the available recruiters passing by recruiters repository. I will pass the availability, and then I have a list of recruiters. From these available recruiters, I will look for the one who can test my candidate. So I will look for the skills of the available recruiter. If he covers all the skills of my candidate, so I will take the first one, and he is my recruiter. In our ubiquitous language, we call this recruiter an appropriate recruiter. Okay, so I will just use the same term in my code. Then I should book the availability of this recruiter, because if I don't, he could have many candidates at the same time. So we should book his availabilities. And at the end, I will just create an interview object, save it, and pass it as response to my human resource. Okay, perfect. Now, if you have any question, just interrupt me, okay? You can turn on your microphone and ask your questions, or if you want, you can send a message to the chat. Alina will ask your questions. So in the model layer, I have three objects: the candidate, the interview, and the recruiter. I can find also the interfaces that separate my model from the external resources, for example, a database. And we can see that all my objects are the Anemic objects. Why? Because I have just some fields, the getters and the setters. The other methods are just the equals, hash codes, and toString. And so I don't have any behavior here. That's why sorry, why he's not happy with behavior. I don't know why. So there is any behavior. So this is an Anemic object. The same for the recruiter class. I have, sorry, it's the interview class. So again, we have an Anemic object because we don't have any behavior. And if I go to the recruiter, it's the same thing. Some fields, the getters and the setters. Okay. Perfect. So what's the idea? The idea, the first step is to refactoring this code, because we want a code with rich objects, not the anemic objects. But the problem that in our case is that we don't have any tests. So what we mean by refactoring? Refactoring is just changing the structure of the code without changing its behavior. So if we change the structure of the code, its behavior should not change. That's what we mean by refactoring. And a bad practice is starting the refactoring without covering the test. Most of the time, what the developers do is they made a change, they take their mouse, they run a server, they run a user interface, then they will click on many buttons, they will verify if they had the same results that they expect, and if it's okay, they said, okay, so my change was a good change. I didn't broke anything, and still we are not sure if we broke anything or not. So that's not the idea. The idea is having automated tests that tells us after each change in the code rapidly if we broke anything or not. But writing the test is too long and boring, and that's one of the main reasons why developers don't write tests. So if we want to start in classic way is, okay, I will go to my plan interview should, so it's my test class. So I don't need that. I will first of all choose a good name for my test. So the plan interview should find an available recruiter who can test candidates. Okay, it's a good name for my test that tells what we expect. So we separate our test in 3 parts: given, when, and then. Okay, in given parts, we know that we have a plan interview. So I will create a new one. We can see that we need a candidate repository, a recruiter repository, and an interview repository. So we have the fake classes that we will use. So fake candidates, fake recruiters, and fake interview. Okay, so I will make an object for it. So it's a planned interview. Then in the let's call this an interview. Then in when part of my test, I will call a method. I will do an action. So it's the plan, and I will pass a candidate ID. So as we saw, for example, we have the candidate ID 123, and then we need a local date. So its availability. So the 123 candidate is available, for example, at local date of, so at 2021, in February and in 10th of February. Okay. So then we have a planned interview after this action, and then in the last part of our test, we should expect that this object contains what all the information that we want. So, for example, we say assertions assert that the planned interview is equal to expected interview. Okay, and here we should create an interview object and then we should set, so an expected interview in interview. And then in the expected interview, we should set a recruiter, we should set a candidate, we should set an interview date, and it's too boring. And after that, if I want to have another test, I do the same thing, and then I will pass, for example, null here, and I expect some other behavior here. Okay, so that's really not the idea. I don't want it. If you agree with me, in all the tests that I write, there are just 2 parameters that I change. So if I could have just one test with different parameters, it should be really good idea. So that's why I want to introduce the approval test for you. So the approval test is really fast to write, you will see. They are easy to learn, they are multi-platform, they are really compact, so just one line of code and all your code is covered by the tests. It's based on Golden Master. If you don't know Golden Master, I will tell you how that works. And the disadvantage of this method is that it's not enough by itself. So you can complete your approval test with unit tests, with integration tests, and so on. So let's implement the approval tests. Okay. So we told that the only parameters are this candidate ID and this date. Okay, so I will just put them out. Okay. Perfect. So it's the interview date. Oh, sorry. Okay, I will put them out of my code here. Okay, so and I don't need the then part because approval test will do it for me. So all I need is these 2 parts. So I will just put them in a method. I will name it plan interview. Okay. Perfect. And this method should return something. This is the result of this action. So I would say return that, make plan interview, return an interview. Okay, perfect. And then I will use this method, verify all combinations of approval tests. Okay, let's use it. Let's see what happens here. So verify all combinations. You can see that it takes a function, which is our plan interview function, and then some arrays of parameters. Okay, let's use it. So so this plan interview, this is my function, and then I should have some arrays of objects. So I will just transform these 2 these two lines, these two objects to arrays objects. So I have candidate IDs here, and here I have interview dates. So let's do that. It's easy to do in Java. Okay. Perfect. I don't need this line anymore. And here, so the first parameter of my plan interview is the candidate ID. So I will pass the candidate IDs and then the interview dates. And here we are, we have a test. Okay, so now I will run the test and you will see that the test will not work. Why? Because I will just introduce the golden master, the golden master way of work. So let's run the tests. Let's see what happened. So, okay, just for your information, I use WinMerge to merge my my files. That's why this software came on. So what we can see here is that we can have a file that's name is receive at the left, and we have a file that's the name is approved at the right. These two files are made by approval tests. If we go to our structure on the tests, you can see now you have two files that are added to our test part. So the one that the name is approved and the other that the name is received. That's what we are seeing here. Okay, so the received is telling you, okay, I ran the tests with these two parameters, with the ID 1, 2, 3 and this date. And the result was that an interview with a candidate, his skills is .NET, Java, PHP, and JS. His name is Alex. I found a recruiter, the recruiter ID is 002. He has these skills, he has this availability, and look at that. In the availabilities, so we can find the 20 February of 2021. And that's why we booked the original date, which is the 20 February. Okay, so this code is working well. I'm just verifying that. And his name is Mary, and the interview date is 20 February 2001. This is what I received. I will pass this part of what I received to the approved file, which is blank for now. So I will just do that. Okay, I will save it. And from now, each time that I run my tests, approval test will verify the results with this approved file if they are the same. So I didn't broke anything. If they are not the same, so I broke something and I should roll back. Okay, so let's do that. So by theory, if I run the test now, it should be green because approved and received file are the same. That works. Excellent. Okay, and now I can just add data to my test. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These are my candidates. I can also add bad data, like or a bad ID. Okay, I could do the same for my dates. So let's do that. For example, the 21, the 22, I can add a date too far, so 2033. I can add another date, for example, 0158. Oh, that doesn't work. So 1789. I can also add null, okay, and that's all. I wrote many different cases for these tests. I have just one test. I have many data. I parameterize my test, and from now, approval test will check everything for me. As I added the data, again, my test will be red. We will see why. Now, let's see. So the first line, the 1, 2, 3, and 20 February 2021, it was the same. So its color is white. The others is the combination with 1, 2, 3 and other dates and null. And again, for 5, 6, for 4, 5, 6, I have the same combination. For 7, 8, 9, for any for a blank string, for null, and for the bad ID. So the only thing that I should do is just to pass what I received to my approved, to save things, and if I run this test again, it will be green. Perfect. And let's check just if as we do golden master, we should check test coverage. So let's run these tests by coverage. Okay, I will just get out from presentation mode, or even not. I think I can run tests here by coverage. Yeah, so I will run the test by coverage. Okay, and if I go to my plan interview, as you can see, you can see these green lines inside of my codes. That's because all of these codes are covered by tests now. I can also go to my objects, for example, to candidate object. So in candidate object, we can see that this method is not covered by test, and that's normal because it's not used. The equals is the same, or for example, the toString is used. So very well, we have good tests. Let's just go back to our code, and perfect. We covered our tests, but we covered our code by tests. So now we can start refactoring. The first, oh, sorry, I don't know what I did. I changed something. Just if you have any problem, just tell me. Yeah, I would hide this part. Okay, so yeah, I will just push this code. So step 1 to my repository in explicit branch. Okay, let's go to step 2. In the second step, we want to apply a pattern that the name is sandwich pattern. The idea is to finding the shared states and put them in the extreme top and extreme down of our code. If we do that, we can find in our domain between these two share state, and so we will make a sandwich. What do we call share state? It's all the interactions with the external world. For example, your user interface or your database or any other web services that you call to giving some data. These are share states. The domain is where we have our business logics, for example, the methods can test, and so on. So let's do this this part together. So again, turn on your microphones and tell me if this line of code, the line 24, is a share state. So what do you think? Any suggestion? So the answer is yes. This is a share state because the candidates is a repository that comes from the outside world. So the candidates, the recruiters and interviews make a side effect in my system. They change something, that they change the state of my system. So this is a share state. Now, again, this line of code is a share state.
Probably no, it's just a simple get, probably.
Yeah, very well. So it's not. So perfect. And how about that one?
The same?
So the answer is no.
Yes.
Actually, the answer is yes, because you have the recruiters, which is a repository. So again, you are reaching the external world. So the idea is just take that code and push it to the extreme top of your application service. How about these instructions? Is a shared state. Have we any interaction to the external world? Yes or no? No, we don't have any interaction with the external world. The same for this one. There is any interaction with the external world. How about that? Is a shared state?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is, because we are changing our changing our system. We are going through recruiters repository, setting some data somewhere. So this one, as it's setting something, I will put it at the extreme down of my code. And here we are, we have our sandwich. This is the bread that you can at the top. This is the bread that you can find at the bottom. And this is the meal between these two breads. Okay. So the idea is that just simply I can't do that because of this object, appropriate recruiter. I will just use interview recruiter and okay. No, this is no, sorry. This is the problem. So interview gets recruiter. Okay. So now I can just take this part of my sandwich and put it down. Let's name it plan interview. Okay. And look at this application service. Look at this use case. So the sandwich pattern. I have the interaction with external world, and I have my domain here that I put down from this part of code. Now it's now we have less code, and we have any business logic. All the business logic now is in this method, and it's something good. That's what we would. I will run the tests just to be sure that I didn't break anything. Okay, perfect. Just to show you, I can, for example, put null here, run the test, and the test should broke down. Yeah, and the approval test tell me, yeah, I received a candidate which is null, but you had a candidate which were not null. So the approval tests are helping me to not broke anything. So I will just roll back, Control Z, and I run the test again. That should be green. I would just prove you that my tests work. Okay, so the second step is done. I can so push this step 2. Well, and now it's time to move this domain part to the objects of our domain layer. So before we had an anemic domain object. We had just the getters and setters in our domain objects, and now we want to have domain objects that contains behaviors. Okay, let's do that. So for example, let's make this plan interview method public. As its name says, I want to move it to the interview method, to the interview object. So I will just put it here, and I do new interview to call this method. I can say that the third step is achieved because now all my business logic is in domain part, is in domain model. This object is no more anemic. It's a rich object now because there is some behavior here. But we will do a better modeling together. Okay, what can we improve here? You can help me if you want. The first thing that I can do is this part of my code. This part of my code checks if the recruiter can test the candidate. So let's move it down. Let's name it can test. Okay. And now I will just ask IntelliJ to, I do F6. IntelliJ suggests me to move it to recruiter. I say, why not? Let's do that. Okay, so IntelliJ helped me to refactor the code. Let's put this method on the top of this recruiter object. So this recruiter object now is a rich object because there is a behavior here. Okay, let's run the tests just to be sure that we didn't broke anything. Okay, perfect. Again, let's look for some improvement in this code. I think that we could inline this part of code here. So let's ask IntelliJ to do that. So I did Control-Alt-N. I inlined my code. Let's run the test again. Everything is fine. And yeah, this part of code could go somewhere. So let's create a method. We can name it get appropriate. Okay, so I have many available recruiters. I have some candidate skills, and then I want to go through these available recruiters, find the first one who can test my candidate skills, and then and if I found anyone, I can raise an exception. Again, this get appropriate recruiter could go somewhere. Let's ask IntelliJ. IntelliJ suggests me to move it to candidates. I say, okay. Let's run tests. The tests are green. It's wonderful. Let's move this method at the top. So here again, this is not an this is not an anemic object, but a rich object because we have behaviors. Okay, let's see what we can do again. These parts of code, we can just make a method to, yeah, get interview is okay. We can inline this code, this part of code. Okay, so let's do just to have a code which that we can read better, a compact code. So in my plan interview, I take the candidate skills. I find an appropriate recruiter. Yeah, let's change the name. So find appropriate recruiter for my candidate by its skills and by and from the available recruiters, and then I make an interview object and pass it to my application service. I can improve something again here. This is the candidate skills. So as this is my candidate who call this method, so I don't need to pass candidates in the methods. I will just I can just let's run the test before. Okay, green. So I can just align it. Let's align it. Okay, and then I can just use the candidate skills in the place of this parameter. So I will just add skills. And this parameter, so I can just remove it. Let's do that. So refactor, change signature, and the second one, I want to remove it. Refactor, okay. So I have less arguments for this method and it's better. And I'm using the skills of my candidates. Okay, it's perfect. And this object is, and this line of code is smaller, so it's better. Let's run the tests. We broke something, and what we did, what we received is a null pointer exception. Okay, we have also a null pointer exception at the approved part, so it's a good thing. The only change that we have, the only difference that we have between the received and approved file is where the null pointer exception is cached. Here now is in find appropriate recruiter, before it was in get skills on candidate recruiter. It's not a problem, but as I don't want, as I want always having the green tests, I will just roll back. I could stay the same, but I will just roll back to having green tests. After that's, if I want, I can add other tests to be sure. Here I have just my approval test, so I will not do something dangerous. Okay, very well. What we can improve again? I think it's not really bad. Let's go back to the application service. So plan interview, okay. And I think we can say that the step 3 is done, because now we have rich domain objects. We dispatched our business rules to our different domain objects. So let's just push this part of code. So we are in step 3. Okay. At the 4th step, so our client comes to us and asks us a new business rule to implement a new business rule. The client tells us that recruiter availability must be booked before planning the interview. It's we can't plan the interview before booking the availability of the recruiter. What does that mean? It means that here, the line 31, if I move it here at the line 32, if I change the place with book availability and interview saved, the code should not work. I will run the test, but the test works, and that's not what our client wants. So what we have here named a temporal coupling. A temporal coupling is when your code should respect some orders. For example, if you want to write something in the database, you should first of all open a connection to your database, do your modification, and then close the connection to the database. If you change the order of these things, your code will not work. Okay, so temporal coupling is not something good, but sometimes we should deal with it. And here is the case. We should deal with it. We should find a solution to be sure that this line of code will be executed before this line of code. Okay, so you have 2 solutions or more. Perhaps you know more solutions. The first one, which is the best, is to using your tests. So for example, in Java, you have the Makito library, which has an in-order method. So you can verify in order if the recruiter's book availability will be executed before the interview save. Okay, this is not the solution that we will use. We will use a second solution, which is returning something by book availability recruiter, and then use this something return to the next line. By this way, we will couple these 2 lines of code. Okay, let's do that. So the idea is that book availability returns something. Let's go to the book availability. here I want a recruiter to be returned, and then I want to use, sorry, let's change the signature. Okay, perfect. And so now we can have something returned by the recruiter. So if I use this object returned by this method here to the interview that made here, so my change is done. But here in this method, I should return something. Let's return a recruiter. So the idea is to return between the recruiters. So here I will just go through the availabilities of my recruiter. I will remove the date of the interview, and that's all. So I will go through my recruiters. I will filter on any recruiter that have the same ID than this object's appropriate recruiter ID. Okay, and so find first and then get. Perfect. So now my test should pass. I didn't change anything. I just made this method return something. And so now I will take this line of code and I go through my plan interview and I paste this method here. Okay, so I should use this recruiter here. Here we have the available recruiter. Sorry, the appropriate recruiter. Here, yeah. So I need a new parameter because I need recruiters here. So let's just add it. So recruiter repository recruiters. Okay. Now let's just fix that. Okay, so I will pass a recruiter repository. Very well. So now if I move this line of code, if I move this line of code here, my code broke. If I move it here, my code broke. So I created a temporal coupling between these two lines. Okay, and that's what our client expected. Let's run the tests. The test runs, and so we are done. Okay, so let's push that code. So we are in step 4, and then I will ask you a question. Perfect. So the question is, what could possibly go wrong with the solution that I implemented? Could you find anything strange in this part of code, and especially in this part of code at line 29? Could you turn on your microphone if you find the problem and tells me? Any suggestion? It's about if you know hexagonal architecture or ports and adapters architecture, we made something bad. This dependency, these recruiters, it's a repository, and we are passing a connection with the external world to our domain model. Okay, so now we are using this repository here in our domain model. If I go here, if I go to my structure, I'm seeing that in my model layer, I'm using a repository, and that's not a good thing. The problem is that here our model is no more pure. That's the first thing that I want to share about domain modeling. Your domain should stay pure, especially when you are using a sandwich pattern. What is a pure domain model? Is a domain layer that does not depend on any external resource, for example, a database or a repository or a framework. Its objects know only about primitive or other domain objects. Here, again, it's not the case. These objects are knowing about not a primitive object and not an object which is in the domain layer, I mean candidate, interview, and recruiter. So this is a problem, and we want to solve this problem. So let's see how. In domain modeling, you can see the application layer, the application service layer. That's what we had here. Sorry. An interview. So this is my application service, the plan interview. Okay, this is here, this layer. The application service can call the objects that are in this red circle. This red circle is our domain layer. So here, this is the red circle that we can see. In this red circle, we can find a purple circle. These are the objects, the building blocks of DDD that should not having any interaction with the external world. So the entities, aggregates, value objects, and domain events should not know anything about the database, about the user interface, about the web services. But the repositories, the factories, and domain services can accept the external dependencies. So to solve this problem, we will use a domain service. Okay, let's do that. So let's do that. I will create a class here in my domain that the name is book recruiter. Okay, and this book recruiter, so as we said, is a domain service. Okay, and the only thing that I do is to go into interview objects and moving this part of code. Let's do that public, and moving this part of code to my domain service. Okay, so here we have interview, get interview. So we go to this method, and here it's not the aggregate interview that we call, but our book recruiter domain service. So by doing that, I solve the problem of domain purity. I have a domain service that accepts an external, that can accept an external dependency. And in plan interview method, I will call the domain objects without passing these recruiters. My domain objects are the recruiter, the candidates. Here I call a method on the candidate. I don't pass any external dependency, and again for the interview is the same. The only call to the recruiter is here and is for booking the availability, which is also a shared state. So everything is fine. In theory, in what we can learn in DDD courses, it's okay. This solution is okay. I will just run the tests. It's green. So in theory, again, I could push this code and say that the step 5 is done. But there is a problem again. So did that really help what we did? Do you have any response about this question? Does we really fix the problem of dependencies and having a pure domain which is independent?
Maybe someone also has related questions, so don't hesitate to ask them.
Yeah, sure. So the answer is no. That help a little bit, because now if we want to test book recruiter, we have just one dependency, and it's easier to test comparing to this class. Okay, that's the only thing that we gained in this new solution. But the base problem, which is these recruiters, still exists. And the reason is that we are implementing the sandwich pattern, and we respected the purity of our domain model, but we didn't respect the second part of domain modeling, which is completeness of our domain model. Our domain model is not complete yet. Why? Because we have some business rules which exist in other parts of our code that we should move and we should put in the domain layer. Do anyone have an idea about these business rules who are somewhere else? So these business rules actually exist in recruiter repository. These are these two methods, find recruiter by availability and book availability, that contains business rules, and we didn't move to the domain model. So our domain model again is a pure domain model, but it's not complete. We want to make it complete. Okay, let's see how we can do that. It's easy, because here the only thing that I should do is to taking this part of my code, looking for where the find recruiter by availability is used. So it's here, and just put it here. Okay. So here we have available recruiters. We look for a recruiter who has some availabilities, and we want to find the one who is available at the interview date. Okay, very well. So so here we can say it's available recruiters. Okay, we have 2 available recruiters. Here, my find recruiter by availability is not correct, because here I need just all the recruiters. So I will just change the name. I will change the name. Sorry. So refactor base method. So here is find all recruiters. Find all recruiters. We don't use the availability here, so we can refactor this method, change the signature, the base method, and then remove this parameter. Okay, refactor it, please. Very well. Let's go back to our code. So here, it's not available recruiters, but all recruiters. And just do that. Perfect. Okay, let's run the tests. Oh, really well. That works. So now I can take this part of code and put it in plan interview. Okay, let's move it. Let's go to plan interview and put it here. So here we have all recruiters. Okay. Here we have all recruiters. Okay, very well. Let's run the tests. It's green. Now we still having this dependency, and that's because we still having this book availability that coupled our domain model to the external world. Let's move this method now. So the only thing that we do is to getting the recruiter availabilities and remove the interview dates. So let's just do that. I will just copy this line of code. Let's do that here. I will just put this line. I will comment this line, and I will do that. So recruiter get availabilities remove. Let's.
Super, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we have a question. You don't see questions, but I will just read it for you. Is that okay?
Yes, sure. Yeah, sure.
So we have a question. What would you do if it turns out that going through all the recruiters in the code would cause unacceptable performance impact?
Let me just see the question. It will be easier for me. So resize, raise your hands. Okay, there is a button with small. Okay, what would you do if it turns out that doing through all recruiters in the code would cause unacceptable? Very well. So even Andre, I will respond to your question. This is here. After this slide, I would ask a question. What could possibly go wrong? And that's the the problem is that we have a performance problem. So you are just right. We will talk about it. Okay. Thank you for your question. So let's just run the, okay, perfect. So the idea was to, again, so having a recruiter, for example, an appropriate recruiter, we just want to book the availability. That's what we want to do. And we want just to pass the availability. Okay, let's create this method. And I put the codes that I just copied. So we are already in recruiter class. So that's all I should do. Let's just run the tests. Okay, we have a problem here, which is appropriate recruiter. Let's run the tests. It should be green. It's green. Okay, and now I can remove this line of code. Very well. I can go to my recruiter repository and remove, even IntelliJ tells me that this method is no more used. So I delete it. Perfect. I don't need that anymore. And now I have, yeah, let's move this method to the top of behaviors. Okay, perfect. And okay, now in my domain service, as you can see, IntelliJ is telling me that the recruiter repository is no more used, so I can self-delete this parameter. And now with a domain model which is complete and pure, I really removed any dependency with the external world, and I really respect my sandwich pattern. So if I go to plan interview, I can see that I have my sandwich here. So these interactions with the external world, and this is my domain. Again, my tests pass. Perfect. And if I go to plan interview, I can do more refactoring here. For example, this one, I can put it somewhere else. For example, I can go, let's do that. This is get available recruiters. Okay. Let's run tests. It's green. I can move it to somewhere else. So F6. No, I can't. Why? All candidate variables have types that are not in projects. Would you like to make? Okay, I will do it by hand, as IntelliJ wants to help me. So let's put it in candidates or in recruiter. Recruiter gets available recruiters. Yeah, we need a recruiter. Recruiter. And we will just create this method here. And we put this, we put this code here. That should work. Let's check it. Yes, perfect. So recruiter, get available recruiters by availability between all the recruiters. Let's move this method to the top. And we can continue this exercise to, again, for example, this line of code, candidate find that, no, it's already okay. So yes, we can continue our code to improving our refactoring. Okay, so and another thing that we can do is that this book recruiter, we don't really need it again. So even we can remove the domain service and put everything in the interview. These are the things that we can do. I will just let the code as it is. If you can improve it, you are free to do. And here I can say that my step 6 is done also. Okay, but now again, we have a problem, and someone mentions the problem. The problem is the performance. So as you can see, before we asked from recruiter repository all the available recruiters. Okay, here what we do is retrieving all recruiters from the database, and then in our domain model, we will filter them. Okay, so if you have many recruiters, which is not always the case. In 99% of projects, you don't have a lot of objects that you retrieve from the database. But if you have a performance objective, if you have a performance problem, this solution will not fit your needs. Here we can have a performance problem, because before it was our database that filtered some recruiters which are available, and a database do it much more better than Java. But as we asked, so if you have a performance problem or not, just ask your domain experts or your database administrator. Okay, they can help you to know if you can do that or not. And if the response is it's okay, so you can continue to respecting the sandwich pattern and having a domain model which is pure and complete. So the conclusion is that you can never have a domain model which is absolutely efficient, complete, and pure. You should always choose between these 3 factors: efficiency, the completeness, and the pureness. You can just take 2 of them. You can't take all the 3 ones. And for each of these cases, you have some advantages, you have some problems. How you can decide to use which one? It's just to talking with your domain experts. It's just to understanding his needs, and then you can perhaps find the best solution for your client. So these sandwich patterns helps you to make your domain model pure and complete, but not efficient. And that's all for our live coding session. I will just verify if So that's the end. Perfect. And now it's time for your questions. So I go to chats. Perhaps you have some questions there.
No, we don't have any questions in chat at the moment, but maybe some will appear.
Yeah, sure.